John, whose story we heard in session 9? He found a bag of meth in the car park at work. In the midst of a difficult trial, fighting the desire of his flesh, John had made some good choices. 17 years before this, he had made a series of very poor choices. After a failed marriage, John threw himself back into drug and alcohol abuse. And over a period of about 5 years, his life spiraled out of control. He moved from cannabis to cocaine to meth in a succession of bad choices. Finally, it culminated with getting arrested while he was at work, believe it or not. He was driving while intoxicated. Of course, this landed him in police custody in violation of his probation, federal probation, which is very serious. He ended up in a halfway house in Fresno, California, about 130 miles from home, actually called Motel California. While John was there, he was tested for drugs every day. They watched the urine come out of him to make sure that there was no funny business, and it was very humiliating. He had the option to find a job, but he didn't bother. Instead, he sat around and read, as he only had 3 months to do at the halfway house. So he thought, why get a job? He had food and a bed to sleep in, or 3 slops and a cot, as they say in jail. At the halfway house, there was a cook from Monday to Friday. On weekends, he, along with 25 other detainees, had to have cold sandwiches, etc. There was another option, to cook dinner themselves. The needed supplies would be ordered if someone was willing to cook. So he and another couple of guys started cooking dinner on Saturday and Sunday each week. Barbecue mostly, with veggies, but even though it started out to just have a decent cooked meal for himself, he began to enjoy cooking with the other guys and providing a cooked meal for the rest of the gang. It was also a time of community over the meal. John also had 100 hours of community service to do, so his counsellor at the halfway house suggested he do his community service at the local homeless shelter. They almost always needed a hand in the kitchen. Reluctantly, John chose to give it a try. He did want to be done with community service after all. He spent 7 hours each day peeling vegetables and serving on the food line. He had washed pots and pans for his lunch while he was in 7th to 9th grades at school, so he wasn't totally at a loss in working in a commercial kitchen environment. His wife is very grateful now, as he is invaluable in the kitchen. During this 100 hours of community service, John discovered that he liked serving others and liked working in the kitchen. The head chef at the homeless shelter was pretty nice once he got to know John a little bit. The most challenging aspect of the experience was interacting with the homeless men and women that came to the shelter for lunch and dinner. They were often on alcohol and drugs. This stretched John's patience quite a bit, but soon he learned he needed to listen and not talk too much. A few years later, after the majority of his consequences were done from his time of drug and alcohol abuse, he finally went back to church. He chose to get involved in serving others through volunteering with his church's outreach in Los Angeles on Skid Row, where many homeless people lived on the street in cardboard boxes. It was a strange experience for John, seeing people in their little makeshift homes that they would build each evening as the sun was going down, often drinking alcohol and doing drugs, mostly cocaine and meth. These were the very things that were instrumental in John's own fall from grace, losing his job, etc. John was beginning to take his eyes off himself, and that was a really important part of his healing and recovery journey. John's focus was changing. It was moving away from himself and towards other people. One of the things that is in the centre of addictive behaviour is a kind of narcissism, a preeminent focus on self. It is not necessarily a love of self, but a definite preference for self. What do I want? What do I need? No one else cares for me. I must put myself first within my addiction. Nobody probably thinks this way, but the way those caught up in addictions live demonstrates this attitude. Our serving other people can be a way that God works in us to bring about change in our lives. It makes us think about somebody else and their needs rather than our own. Even if this change of direction in our thoughts is only for half an hour a day, it's half an hour that we are not solely thinking about ourselves. It's the start of renewing our minds, as Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Service to others is one aspect of God renewing our minds and maturing us as a Christian. As shared in John's story, the service he was involved in was in the community, first at the halfway house, then at the homeless shelter, and then through his church's outreach. In the homeless shelter, he got an idea of the value of helping others. In his church community, he not only was able to help others, he watched other Christians exemplify service and share the gospel with a world that is in such desperate need. John also got a glimpse of what might have been if he had continued his downward spiral with drugs and alcohol, and it shocked him. Service is just one aspect of looking outward, and for John, it really grew out of his involvement with his church. When he initially started going there, he had remembered a song by Bob Dylan, and one of the lyrics was, "If you want to learn, you need to get close to the teacher." And so he took that to heart and sat up front in the church, and he got to know the pastor. John got involved in everything he could at church: men's Bible study, playing on the worship team, the weekly prayer evening, etc. John soon discovered that being a part of all those ministries was not just for him. It was less about what he could get out of it and more about what he could put into it. Others actually benefited from his presence and participation. That was unexpected, but also a huge blessing. Be blessed and bless others. Get involved with church. Get to know your church family. It will help everyone involved to grow. We all walk this narrow path together, and we need each other's participation and encouragement.